It was one of the most brutal murders that I've ever seen or heard of, and it was clearly a murder that was intended for him to suffer.
The body had been on fire. He was alive when he was set on fire.
They wanted to torture him.
You know, we were both being charged with open murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
This was premeditated, cold-hearted, just evil.
He spoke to me about him like, my girlfriend is afraid of her ex-boyfriend. And if he doesn't stop, I'm gonna have to get involved.
You don't have to kill somebody to make them leave you alone, okay?
She had become upset, distraught, you know, and we came up with this stupid idea.
He felt like he was keeping her safe.
She could have made this whole thing up to get you all stirred up.
It was clear that she was simply a master manipulator.
He found this golden ticket with her, and he had to do whatever she wanted him to do to obtain that. You took these two people together, and it just turned into pure evil.
November 14th, 2009, South Haven, Michigan. It's just after noon when authorities receive a 911 call from a concerned resident about a car fire in a forest clearing.
He lived in the area outside of town, very close to Lake Michigan, but a little bit outside of the city. It was a pretty rural area.
He came across a car that was burned out and called 911.
South Haven Fire and Police Departments quickly respond to the scene.
You could see the car smoldering from the road. It had been stuck in the mud. The car was not too far off the main road, and it was burned completely.
At first, they're just trying to piece it together to find out what happened here. Was it someone that intentionally torched their car for insurance purposes, or was it something more nefarious?
The fire investigators for South Haven Fire began to walk around the area to see if they could discover any evidence of a crime. One of the fire investigators, approximately 100 yards from the vehicle, came across a burned body underneath a tree. At that point, they then contacted our central dispatch. So once I received the call that we had a body, all detectives came out to the scene to work this case.
The body had been duct taped around the head and mouth. The arms had been duct taped behind the back, and there was a large amount of duct tape around the thighs of the individual.
It was one of the most brutal murders that I've ever seen or heard of, and it was clearly a murder that was intended for them to suffer.
And as we stood there, we had more questions than we had answers. We had no idea what had occurred here.
So we had to first discover who our victim was, and then from there work our way out.
The car that was burned was totally unidentifiable, but there was a license plate in the VIN that was also intact.
The registered owner was Brandon Silverlight, and that's when we started backtracking, trying to find out where he was or if this was the deceased.
Authorities head to Brandon's registered address, where they're met by his wife, Jennifer.
We told her that we had a burned car, and we were trying to find out or ascertain where Brandon might be.
We found out that Brandon was missing from the night before and had not returned. It was not returning any of her phone calls or text messages.
We start with, when's the last time you saw him? Did he leave the home? What was his plans for the evening? What were you told by him? And that was the opening of our discussion.
Born in Michigan in 1984, Brandon Silverlight grew up in South Haven.
Brandon came from a good home. He had good parents, a good life. My first impression of Brandon was he was just a goofy guy, and he was very personable. He could just be silly with us, and he was always very nice to people.
After graduating high school in 2003, Brandon enrolled in Western Michigan's School of Music.
Brandon was very musical. His family was also musically inclined. He had scholarships lined up. He was going to be a music teacher.
On nights and weekends, Brandon played gigs around town with a local band.
My relationship with Brandon was bandmate. We met him at a party where we were playing, and he ended up just joining pretty much on the spot. He was a very good drummer, and he was also very good on bass.
According to Jennifer, a shared love of music was what attracted her to Brandon in 2001.
She was involved with the Western Michigan University Marching Band. At one point, Brandon was, so I believe that is the common denominator for them was music.
Jennifer was an attractive woman and a very self-assured and strong-minded woman.
The couple dated for 7 years. In February 2008, they married in Lake Buena Vista, Florida.
They had been together for several years before marrying, and so there was a well-established partnership.
He had a good life, and he had the whole world in front of him.
Nearly 2 years into their marriage, Brandon's car has been found torched by the side of a rural road, and unidentified remains point to a homicide.
Jennifer really didn't know what to think of it at that point.
She had explained that he had left the night before to play video games and had not returned.
She indicated that he was going to a LAN party. It was like a group of people getting together at a location and playing one of these online games. And he left around 10 o'clock in the evening or so.
When it got later on in the night, she had texted, and his reply was very short, and his phone was then turned off.
The phone calls went to voicemail, texts were left unanswered.
Jennifer indicated that it wasn't uncommon for Brandon to go gaming with friends, but it was unusual for him to be out all night the way that he was on this night.
Jennifer says instead of letting her worries get the best of her, she convinced herself that maybe Brandon didn't come home for another reason.
Jennifer indicated at one point that they did have an open relationship.
Following their conversation with Jennifer, investigators attend the autopsy.
The victim was taken to Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, where the autopsy was performed.
Because of the condition of the body, dental records had to be used to identify the deceased, and the deceased was identified as Brandon Silverlight.
So they need to go in and find out more and do some digging into the background. Who would have wanted to do something like this? Who were his enemies?
Coming up, the discovery of a bitter rejection will lead authorities to a scorned lover wrought with obsession.
He had filed a stalking complaint against her. My own theory is that it was, well, if I can't have him, no one else will have him either.
She had to have fed him some horrible lies so he would retaliate.
On November 14th, 2009, South Haven, Michigan authorities are investigating the brutal murder of Brandon Silverlight.
From the autopsy, we learned that the victim had received several stab wounds throughout his body. He also had a laceration across the neck and had some blunt force trauma to his head area.
The body had been on fire. The autopsy indicated the presence of elevated levels of carbon monoxide in the lungs. He was alive when he was set on fire.
It looked like someone had drugged Brandon about 100 yards underneath a tree tortured him, stabbed him several times, and then that's when they set him on fire. It was definitely a hateful homicide, I would say. The person that was involved in this was definitely out to hurt this person and make them suffer. You begin from the inside and work your way to the outside, because usually the closest people are either involved in a crime like this or they have information on who might have done it.
Following the autopsy, investigators must break the tragic news to Brandon's wife, Jennifer.
When we informed her that Brandon was deceased, she was very distraught.
She was in shock and she was very upset.
Investigators asked Jennifer about the state of her marriage to Brandon and whether it led to any issues.
They'd had some rocky patches, but they had weathered them as young couples do. She said she had recently become pregnant and that they were looking to start a family.
Their marriage had grown closer as she had found out she was pregnant. So things were settling down. Maybe not as open a relationship as they had agreed to initially.
Brandon's wife seemed very concerned and truthful.
Because he had not come home, she had done some of her own, for a better term, investigating. The phone that Brandon had was a family account. She could access this, and she was able to access the numbers that had been called from early in the afternoon of the 13th, all the way up until Brandon didn't appear to respond to the phone anymore. There was approximately 16 entries. We have no narrative, we just have the date and the time, who initiated, who received. Jennifer stated that one of the phone numbers that was repeatedly contacted, she believed to be an Alison Martin's phone number.
Alison had been in Brandon's life, his girlfriend, before he married Jennifer.
Investigators wrap up their interview with Jennifer and reach out to 22-year-old Alison Martin, who lives an hour away in Kalamazoo.
Detective O'Reilly and I had made contact, and we conducted a voluntary interview.
We did ask her some very general questions, did not get into any accusatory type of questions at that point. We were just gaining background information at that point.
So Alison grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Her parents were, I would say, wealthy. She lived a privileged life.
It appears that she had opportunities, that she had graduated high school from a good school here in the area.
Alison had a job at one point at a animal kennel, but she just had odd jobs, nothing, no career set or anything like that.
Investigators shift their line of questioning to her past with Brandon.
She provided details of her dating and her relationship with Brandon.
Investigators learn that Alison met Brandon when she was 16 years old.
They had met while Brandon was working part-time at a guitar shop, and Alison would show up at his work.
They dated for some time, but it didn't work out for various reasons.
She claimed that she was over him and she had moved on.
We kind of go through the dating history. She gave us a former boyfriend, 2 former boyfriends, and then she said she was currently engaged to Justin Terpstra.
When was the last time that you actually physically saw Brandon?
It's almost been years now.
Okay. All right. Have you talked to him or had any communication via phone, internet, email, text, or anything?
I'm nervous.
We knew she had had recent contact with Brandon, so that is an indicator that she's not being truthful.
Following Alison's statement, investigators subpoena the data from both her and Brandon's cell phones and discover Alison and Brandon had been communicating frequently for the past week.
So what the search warrant showed was in the evening hours of the 13th, there was repeated texting contact between Brandon Silverlight's phone and Alison Martin's phone.
Alison saying, come on, let's meet. I have this other woman. Let's get together, have some fun. Let's have sex. Let's have a three-way.
Brandon said, okay. There was discussions about a rendezvous at a cousin's at the restaurant in South Haven. Another text, okay, we'll meet at cousin's and then follow you to the trailer.
Investigators discover that on November 13th, Alison and Brandon sent messages confirming their plans.
That was the narrative of the text back and forth. Can't wait to see you tonight type conversations.
Alison Martin, in her first interview with police, said she hadn't seen Brandon in over a year. In an investigation such as this, when we find clear evidence that someone is lying, that's a strong indication they're trying to cover something else up.
In the days following the brutal murder of 24-year-old Brandon Silverlight, investigators in South Haven, Michigan, have discovered that he made plans to meet his ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Alison Martin, on the night he disappeared.
At this point, we decide that we're going to go confront Alison.
Hey, Alison, how are you? Can we talk to you for a couple minutes?
Yeah.
We wanted to go back over a couple other things with you, and I got a little confused when we talked the other night, and I had asked you when the last time you'd actually seen him, and then the last time that you had any kind of contact with him whatsoever.
I can't remember. I really can't tell you.
At which point, Detective O'Reilly confronted her with the fact that we had the site towers, that her phone was in South Haven, she was in South Haven, and that we had the narrative in text. She flew into a rage.
You can't do that. That's an invasion of privacy.
We have search warrants. We have court orders.
I want a lawyer. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want a lawyer.
You know what, Alison? Quite honestly, you need a lawyer, and you better get a very good one. Thank you for your time.
With Alison no longer willing to talk, investigators turn to the person closest to her.
The next step that we do is research on her fiancé, Justin Terpstra. We want to gather some intel about Justin Terpstra before we choose to interview him.
Investigators learn 24-year-old Justin was born in Michigan and raised by his father.
My older brother Justin was the third of 4 children. There are 3 boys and 1 girl. We weren't necessarily a poor family, but we weren't wealthy either. We were kind of wild youngins, kind of left to our own devices.
Justin, I mean, he was a happy kid. He was very mischievous.
He was a jokester. He was a clown. He wanted attention, but if he couldn't get it in a positive way, he would resort to negative ways. He was a bad boy. He was drinking, smoking. He had been in and out of different juvenile detention centers. He would get in trouble for stealing, and then while he is serving detention or whatever for that, he would go and steal something else.
Me and Justin grew up together, and he would just somehow manage to get himself in that little bit of trouble enough to get himself thrown back into juvie. And then when he got out and we turned 18, we stayed in contact, but that's when he was having his issues with going back to prison.
Justin was convicted of home invasion.
After being released on parole in June of 2009, 24-year-old Justin got a job at a local restaurant and began taking classes at a local community college.
He seemed like he was ready to start being a man and doing what it took to move forward in life.
I think he just wanted to be a functional, normal civilian that contributes to society.
He was doing everything he needed to do to pursue a better life, and I was happy for him for that. And then he met Alison.
Their meet cute was at the Crow's Nest, which was a coffee shop across the street from the house he was living at. He had a mutual friend that introduced them. He literally only knew her for like a week before he moved in with her.
Allison seemed like a good fit for him because she wanted him to succeed and would be stern with him with the, I don't want you drinking, you need to go to work. And I think he liked that because he has always needed that.
After collecting background information, investigators tracked Justin down.
We knew that Terpstra is on parole. We would contact the parole office and inform them of what we're working on. It turns out that Terpstra had reported his parole officer, but failed to comply with part of his parole. And they subsequently picked him up on a parole violation and lodged him in the Kalamazoo County Jail.
Investigators travel to the jail to interview Justin, where he has been housed for the past few hours.
Well, I'd shake your hand, but since your handcuffs in, I'm Detective O'Reilly, Detective Mathis. We're from the Allegheny County Sheriff's Department. I'm going to be straight up forward with you, okay? There was a homicide over the weekend, okay? Just north of South Haven, and we've already talked to Alison. The person is deceased is her ex-boyfriend. Do you know Brandon Silverlight? No. The only Brandon I know is my brother.
He said he didn't know Brandon, had never met him, and really knew very, very little about him.
And the status of your relationship is you're engaged? Yes. We're actually planning on getting our marriage license pretty soon. You're not involved? No. You got a good girl that you think loves you, and then you find out that maybe she does love you, but she may have feelings for somebody else. It's logical to think that. Another logical thing could be that she takes off, you're not really sure where she's going, so you follow her and catch her in the act. Maybe you went to kick his ass or something, and things got out of hand, correct? In my mind, it just seems so out the wall ridiculous.
According to Justin, he was at Allison's home in Kalamazoo on the night of the murder.
We have not done your cell phone yet. We're going to do your cell phone. If you're lying to us, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. That's simple, okay?
As the interview continues, investigators notice Justin has some injuries on his arm.
Okay, what you got over here? Burns here. Those are burns? Did you report that at all? Well, I mean, it was a grease burn from the fryers. You go back to your cell, go back to your bunk, and you rest well.
The fact that he was burned was clearly suspicious and more than likely indicated that he had in fact been involved with the murder of Brandon Silverlight.
Coming up, stories begin to shift as a betrayal comes to light.
Basically, she said something along the lines that, doesn't it hurt when someone else has control over you?
I really think he felt like he was keeping her safe.
In their preliminary interviews with police, Alison Martin and her fiancé, Justin Terpstra, both denied any knowledge of the murder of Brandon Silverlight. But investigators know Alison is lying, and they strongly suspect Justin is too.
Those are burns? Those are burns I got from working. Fire burns? 2.
Justin had claimed that he wasn't in South Haven the night of the murder, so investigators file a subpoena for his phone location records. In the meantime, they re-examine the messages between Alison and Brandon.
We knew in the evening hours of the 13th, there was repeated texting contact between Brandon Silverlight's phone and Alison Martin's phone. There was discussions about a rendezvous at a restaurant in South Haven. And then I will follow you to the trailer.
It was discovered that Allison's parents owned a summer trailer. It's a gated area.
The trailer that the Martins owned was less than a half a mile from the burnt part and the body recovery. My raw reaction was, holy crap, we gotta go there right now.
With a search warrant at the trailer, we did enter the trailer, and there was no indication that there was any type of scuffle in the trailer.
But the steps to the mobile home were askew, rocks had been displaced. Something happened there.
There was also a piece of duct tape that was folded on itself that was laying on the ground on the concrete.
The duct tape was significant because that's how Brandon was bound at the scene.
That's where we thought the initial attack or assault on Brandon occurred.
Detectives return to the station and get the proof they need when they receive the location records for Justin's phone.
Both Justin Terpstra and Alison Martin's phones were in South Haven on the early AM hours of the 14th.
Armed with evidence that Justin had lied to investigators, they bring him in for a second interview.
Justin was confronted with the evidence that put him near the scene.
They talked to him again and again, and eventually he did confess that, in fact, he is the one that killed Brandon Silverlight.
I stabbed him several times.
He said, I did it. Alison had nothing to do with it.
Following Justin's confession, authorities charge him with murder.
It was a shock to me. I mean, I can see Justin stealing. I can see him pulling crimes, but to actually haul off and murder someone was not something I ever thought him capable of.
My jaw hit the floor, and there was no way. You know, I had known Justin my whole life. He was not a violent person like that.
As investigators continue building their case against Justin, they reach out to his family, who explained that Justin had previously mentioned his dislike for Brandon Silverlight.
Justin was talking about Brandon, Allison's ex-boyfriend, and how he keeps contacting her and harassing her. Justin felt that Brandon was a threat to Alison from what she said and how she said it. That's how Justin spoke to me about him. Like, my girlfriend is afraid of her ex-boyfriend, and if he doesn't stop, I'm gonna have to get involved.
Following their conversations with Justin's loved ones, authorities attempt to corroborate Justin's claims that Brandon harassed Alison.
There was nothing ever reported by Martin regarding Silverlight stalking her or harassing her or abusing her.
In fact, Brandon had filed a stalking complaint against Alison in, I believe, 2007 with the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. Brandon had indicated that she was engaging in unwanted phone calls to him, and I believe came to his residence uninvited. And so the police actually investigated and did interview Alison Martin, and she admitted to the police that she was in fact obsessed with Brandon Silverlight. Brandon was her first love, and that she had boyfriends after that, but their relationship would rekindle from time to time. So Brandon meant a lot to her.
We knew Alison was lying and not being fully truthful with Justin.
At that point, the law enforcement team believed the motive for this crime was based on Alison Martin, on her not being able to have Brandon the way she wanted, and if she couldn't, no one would.
In Allegan County, Michigan, authorities have charged Justin Terpstra with the murder of Brandon Silverlight. But they believe his fiancée, Alison Martin, played a larger role than he admitted.
Alison Martin still was maintaining she was not the responsible party for this, so they needed more evidence.
Then, 20 days into the case, a local resident named Sean West contacts investigators with damning information about Alison.
Sean West was a friend of Terpstra's and Martin's.
Sean West said that during Thanksgiving dinner, he asked Alison what happened because he was hearing things and he knew that Alison and Brandon had been an item.
Sean West said that Alison confessed to him.
And she told him, I stabbed him first.
She wanted him to experience pain, and she had made a reference to that it felt like stabbing chicken. Justin had been arrested, and Alison Martin had told Sean West to relay a message to Justin Terpstra to take the fall if he talked to him again. So that was very key information.
Investigators immediately issue a warrant for Alison Martin's arrest. On December 7th, she turns herself in.
Her attorney contacted the prosecutor's office, but she didn't make any statements to us.
Without Alison's cooperation, investigators interview Justin for a third time, hopeful that he'll flip on his fiancée.
So she has been charged.
She's been charged.
What has she been charged with?
She's been charged with open murder and conspiracy to commit murder. We need to know Alison's participation. We know, there's no doubt, with the text and the other things that have gone on, that she helped you plan this. Bottom line is, it's all premeditated. She participated in luring him there.
Alison Martin had invited or promised Brandon Silverlight a sexual three-way with herself and another unnamed girl.
So let's talk about the text. Those came from Alison, right?
Yes.
Thank you. And in regards to the plan and the setup, she was doing all that texting?
She was doing the texting under my influence.
Justin said that he forced Alison to help him commit that crime. He basically was going to take the fall for Alison. They were lying to us.
You didn't threaten her. You did not intimidate her. She acted of her own free will, didn't she? Because she was mad. She was upset.
Justin continues to claim that Alison feared Brandon's harassment and makes another shocking allegation.
Justin said that Alison had claimed that Brandon had sexually assaulted her.
And we talk about our past, so that we can try to avoid bringing that into our relationship. This is that, the guy that I told you about. I told her basically ignore it or tell him, buzz off, whatever. But they continue talking.
Alison and Brandon did have communication with each other, even after he filed the stalking report.
She had become upset, distraught,
You don't have to kill somebody to make them leave you alone, okay?
In his mind, Brandon was very bad towards Alison in their relationship, and that he believed Brandon was trying to get back in a relationship with Alison. I believe that she was using this story to get what she wanted. Alison was looking for someone to kill Brandon because she could not have him anymore.
She was stalking him. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
So she could have made this whole thing up to get you all stirred up, mad, angry enough to help her carry out something.
I don't believe she would do that.
Could it be that she thinks that Brandon's happy and Brandon now is having a child and that she was just jealous of that whole entire situation?
There's more to it than that.
Is it? Okay.
Under intense pressure, Justin slowly begins to crack.
I'm upset because this guy, who I don't think too highly of, is contacting the girl. And we came up with this stupid idea.
Eventually, he did tell the police that she was involved as well. I think that once he realized that she had lied, he blamed her.
She's not walking away from this.
In his pre-arraignment interview on December 8, 2009, Justin Terpstra has implicated his fiancée, Alison Martin, in the plot to murder her ex-boyfriend, Brandon Silverlight.
Justin said that they tried to lure him to the Kalamazoo area prior to the South Haven area, and it never worked out.
And then it developed into this potential for a hookup involving a threesome.
And this was the bait to get him there. I don't know his mindset, but it appeared to spark his interest.
What time did this happen?
He was to meet her around 11 o'clock.
Alison had dropped off Justin to the trailer prior to her meeting Brandon at the restaurant. At that point, Brandon had followed Alison to the trailer.
Justin explains that when Alison and Brandon arrived at her parents' trailer for the threesome, he was waiting.
Justin Terpstra hit him in the head, I believe knocking him out.
They then duct taped him around his legs and ankles, and then were able to drag him to his vehicle and bring him to the crime scene.
They got him out, duct taped him to a tree.
I can't recall whether she's standing first or I standing first.
But you know she stabbed him twice.
She stabbed him twice. Basically, she said something along the lines that, doesn't it hurt when someone else has control over you?
They both wanted Brandon to die, but they wanted to torture him before they ultimately killed him.
I stabbed him a lot. I don't know.
How many times?
20, 30 times. I don't know.
They ultimately set him on fire and kill him. They tried to cover up the crime by burning his car. This was premeditated, cold-hearted, just evil.
The motive was Allison's revenge. She was obsessed with Brandon Silverlight.
She was upset that he had found another person. My own theory is that it was, well, if I can't have him, no one else will have him either.
It was probably one of the most heinous, just most disregard for human life that I've ever seen in my 30 years.
It's just, it's almost too cruel to think about. I absolutely feel bad for his family having to go through this. Nobody deserves this.
Alison Martin and Justin Terpstra are tried separately in the fall of 2010. At Alison's trial, prosecutors present evidence that Brandon's ex remained fixated on him after their breakup.
She had no prior criminal history, but she did have a history of numerous boyfriends and unusual behavior, obsessive type behavior.
She tried to manipulate prior boyfriends into beating up Brandon, but that didn't work because they didn't believe the lies that she told. Unfortunately, Justin Terpstra did.
I believe that she had to have fed him some horrible lies to make him believe that Brandon would have done horrible things to her, so he would retaliate.
I really think he believed that Brandon was a very bad person. He felt like he was keeping her safe.
It was clear that Alison Martin, I don't know how else to say it, is simply a master manipulator.
During their trials, they both pointed the finger at each other. You know, Justin's attorney argued that this was all Alison, Allison and her attorney argued that it was all Justin.
The evidence was very clear that Justin and Allison lured Brandon to that remote location with the specific intent to murder him.
Both were convicted of murder one, which in the state of Michigan is automatic life in prison with no chance of parole.
I don't know that Brandon's family ever had a sense of closure, not when the perpetrators were arrested, not when they were convicted, not when they were sentenced. Because I think for Brandon's family, for them, this is a life sentence.
It broke my heart to have a brother who could do something like that. It does make me sad, but at the same time, you made your bed. So he needs to lie in it.
I think Alison manipulated Justin, and Justin, coming from a broken home, found this golden ticket with Alison and her family, and he had to do whatever she wanted.
It began with a whisper in the humid Florida night, a scream swallowed by the darkness of May 2005. A small town rattled awake by the disappearance of a 17-year-old girl, her name whispered in the hallways of high schools and the pews of Sunday churches, carried in fear from neighbor to neighbor. She vanished on her way home from a friend's house, the streetlights flickering as if signaling the dread that had already crept into every corner of the community. The air was thick, oppressive, scented with salt from the nearby coast, yet that night it carried the sharp tang of panic. Her bicycle, abandoned at the curb, tire rims still spinning in the empty street, became the first clue that someone, somewhere, had taken her from the world of ordinary teenage life and shoved her into a nightmare no one wanted to name aloud. Families huddled behind locked doors, glancing at every shadow that stretched from the palm trees lining the avenue, listening for the telltale crunch of footsteps that might never come. Police arrived with sirens piercing the humid dark, lights reflecting off the wet pavement, and the first detectives stepped onto the scene with a professional detachment that masked the gnawing suspicion in their own chests. This was no ordinary missing person. The girl's name became a fixture in the local media. Every headline screamed the same message: a cold case in the making, a tragedy whose resolution would elude everyone for years. Yet in those early hours, no one could have known how deep the rabbit hole went, how tangled the threads of this small Florida town's darkest secrets would become. Her parents, a middle-class couple who had spent their lives in quiet obscurity, became unwilling actors in a drama they had never auditioned for. Their home, normally a sanctuary of beige walls and the hum of air conditioning, transformed into a command center of grief and desperate hope. Phones rang endlessly, neighbors offered condolences and theories, but nothing could pierce the thick fog of panic and disbelief. The father, stoic but trembling, scoured maps, retraced her last steps, questioned passers-by, every gesture a ritual of denial and hope. The mother stayed on the edge of hysteria, eyes red-rimmed, hands clutching her daughter's favorite sweater, her heart hammering in rhythm with each knock at the door. Meanwhile, the police worked quietly, interviewing friends, checking alibis, searching the woods and canals that lace the town like veins. Every shovel of earth turned over a potential key, every bend in the trail a false promise of discovery. Weeks became months. Each lead dissolved into nothing. A man spotted near the canal, a van idling with no license plate, a neighbor who had heard strange noises one night. Each possibility raised the heart and then tore it down again, leaving only the gnawing emptiness that cold cases are notorious for. Newspapers printed speculative theories, some rational, others sensational. The town buzzed with tension, whispered accusations, and the quiet judgment of eyes that always seem to notice more than they say. A mother's grief became communal, a shared unease. Children walked home with cautious steps, the innocence of youth punctured by the invisible presence of what had been taken, of what remained unresolved. And yet, despite the efforts, the hours, the searches, the forensic teams, nothing concrete emerged. No body, no confession, No trace that could turn the night of terror into a closed chapter. The case grew colder, the trail growing faint under layers of Florida heat, rain, and the relentless march of time. Detectives shifted in and out of the case like ghosts, their notes filing higher and higher, memories fading in the public consciousness. They logged every detail: the girl's favorite song, the candy bar wrappers found in her backpack, the small scuff on the pedal of her bike, the text messages she had sent hours before vanishing. Each detail was cataloged with the meticulousness of archivists guarding secrets meant to be rediscovered decades later. Families moved, new residents replaced old ones. The town's rhythms continued outwardly normal, yet in basements, garages, and dusty file rooms, the cold case files accumulated like snowdrifts that no one knew how to melt. The investigators' frustration grew as subtle patterns teased them: fingerprints that yielded nothing, footprints that led to blank walls, tips that rang hollow. The community oscillated between fear, anger, and a weary resignation. The tragedy was both public and intimate. Every citizen felt the invisible shadow stretch over their lives, a reminder that darkness could come without warning, that innocence could vanish in a heartbeat. Years passed. Technology evolved. DNA testing became sharper, databases expanded, patterns once invisible became visible. Yet the case remained unsolved, an open wound in the town's collective psyche. Cold case units reviewed the files like archaeologists of pain, dusting off notes, re-interviewing witnesses, hoping that memory, the most unreliable yet persistent tool, would betray the truth. Every anniversary brought renewed media interest: television crews filming recreations, interviews with teary-eyed parents, and the haunting image of the abandoned bicycles spinning endlessly on the curb. Each year, the public demanded answers, yet the answers refused to emerge. Meanwhile, the detectives who had first walked the streets in 2005 aged with the case. Some retired, some carrying the unresolved agony like a silent scar etched into their souls. The town continued, with new children riding bikes, new families moving into the same streets, unaware of the shadows that lingered over the asphalt. Then came the strange call in 2018, 13 years after that May night, a voice cracking with age and hesitation, confessing a secret that had slept under Florida's heat for over a decade. The confession was not casual. It was precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The speaker knew the details only the perpetrator could know: the route taken, the bicycle left behind, the abandoned backpack, the exact words whispered in the darkness. The community reeled. Police scrambled. Evidence boxes were reopened, and suddenly the case that had grown cold, seemingly invincible, had been pierced by the truth. Families, once numb with grief, felt the old terror and old relief collide into a new, raw emotion. The parents, now older, lines etched by years of worry and hope deferred, clutched each other as the reality sunk in. Their child's disappearance had an explanation, yet the explanation carried its own weight of horror. Witnesses were re-interviewed, alibis cross-checked, old notes compared to the confession. Every word of the admission was verified against evidence that had lain dormant in police archives. Small details, once overlooked, now leapt into significance: a knot in a shoelace, a scratch on a mailbox, a familiar scent noted by a neighbor. Each revelation sent shivers through the investigative team. Cold case investigators, seasoned in disappointment, now experienced the rare thrill of vindication. Yet even with the confession, the community felt shaken to its core. The person responsible had lived among them, their secret buried, invisible, ordinary. The realization that evil can hide behind mundane routines, that years can pass without detection, sent a wave of shock through every corner of the town. The confession revealed more than guilt. It exposed the subtle betrayals of trust, the fractures in relationships, the blind spots of casual observation. Friends and neighbors reeled, realizing that the person they waved to, smiled at, exchanged pleasantries with, carried within them the memory of a night of terror and silence. The town, which had once thought the nightmare belonged to one family, suddenly felt the collective guilt and fear of the community. The media descended, interviews, footage of the parents' reactions, the reenactment of the route, the reconstruction of the timeline, all broadcast for a public hungry for closure, yet terrified by the proximity of the horror. The young girl's face, frozen in photographs from a time before tragedy, became an icon of loss and revelation, a haunting presence that refused to fade with the years. And still, as the confession unfolded, new questions emerged. Motive, opportunity, the exact circumstances of that night. Even as answers were given, the mind struggled to comprehend how such darkness could remain invisible for so long. The story that had begun in whispered panic became a tale of obsession, meticulous planning, and the terrifying ordinariness of evil. Families, neighbors, the police, the town, all were forced to reckon with the unsettling truth. Safety is fragile, innocence is fleeting, and the past has a way of resurfacing with a vengeance. The confession did not erase the years of grief. It only reframed them, showing that each moment of uncertainty had been a thread in a tapestry of horror, meticulously woven and cruelly hidden. By the time investigators concluded the initial round of questioning, the town had entered a state of collective shock. Streets were quiet in the night as if in mourning, homes lit by a single lamplight, the faint rustle of palm leaves carrying the memories of lost youth. Psychologists spoke to families, journalists documented every step, and the case, once cold, now burned brightly in the public consciousness. The community would never be the same. Innocence, once assumed, was now forever questioned. Parents watched children with a new wariness, neighbors observed neighbors with subtle suspicion, and the shadow of the 2005 disappearance, once thought dormant, now loomed larger than ever. It was not just a confession, it was a reckoning. It was the moment when the years of silence, the decades of uncertainty, met the sharp edge of truth. And even as the suspect was taken into custody, as forensic evidence cemented guilt, as the media screamed the finality of the revelation, the town understood that closure is never simple. The echoes of that May night, the sensation of loss, the dread of the unknown, all remained in the streets, in the homes, in the hearts of everyone touched by the cold case. Florida, 2005, once a quiet town, had been forever altered, the confession a shockwave that proved time may pass, but memory, grief, and horror remain. The town did not sleep that night. Even as streetlights flickered over asphalt still warm from the day's sun, there was a tension that refused to fade, a collective heartbeat pulsing with disbelief. Windows stayed lit well past midnight, curtains pulled back just enough to glimpse shadows moving through familiar rooms, shadows that seemed suddenly unfamiliar. Parents whispered to each other in hushed tones about safety, about what they hadn't seen, what could have been hidden behind smiles and hellos for years. The confession had detonated the illusion of normalcy. It was no longer a story confined to old files or media clippings. It was alive, gnawing at the edges of every neighbor's consciousness. In the glow of lamplight, some wondered if the person who had caused this horror had driven past them yesterday, spoken in the line at the grocery store, laughed at a joke at a backyard barbecue. The idea was unbearable, yet undeniable. Evil had worn the mask of ordinary life. Detectives returned to the scene that first night of disappearance, retracing steps with a precision born of obsession. The canals that had been scoured with flashlights and boats were examined anew, water sampled, soil sifted, the very air inspected for trace evidence. Every detail in the confession was scrutinized. Small discrepancies, the kinds that once seemed trivial, now became clues of intent, of methodical planning. Investigators documented the sidewalks, the street signs, the hedges, the fences, mapping every potential angle of escape. They interviewed neighbors who had been interviewed before, forcing memories to surface that had long lain dormant. Eyes squinted in the Florida sun, sweat running down temples, voices strained with effort to remember. A door opening, a bicycle bell ringing faintly in the night, a car that didn't belong. The confessor's knowledge matched some details perfectly and exposed others that no one had noticed. The files that had gathered dust were suddenly gold mines, treasure troves of evidence reinterpreted through the lens of truth. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, poring over fingerprints that had once yielded nothing, DNA swabs long frozen in labs. Advances in technology meant samples once considered useless could now provide clarity. Analysts spent hours staring at microscopes, comparing hair strands, fibers, and skin cells. Each new result created a ripple, connecting points that had previously floated aimlessly in a sea of uncertainty. The local media covered every breakthrough, broadcasting the tension, the hope, the fear. Live feeds carried the faces of investigators, showing the exhaustion of relentless pursuit and the sparks of revelation that sometimes broke through. The public consumed it all with a mixture of fascination and dread, the story evolving daily, yet always circling back to the same terrible truth. A young life had been stolen, hidden, and only now was the mask lifted. Family members of the victim navigated a turbulent storm of emotions. Relief mingled with rage, grief with a cautious satisfaction, fear with lingering doubt. The mother, who had spent years clutching photographs and imagining worst-case scenarios, found herself crying anew, tears of sorrow mixed with tears of validation. The father, long silent in his stoicism, spoke little but trembled with the weight of years spent waiting for justice. Siblings, friends, classmates, all relived moments from that spring of 2005, memories that once seemed ordinary now saturated with the terror of loss. Every smile, every shared joke from years past was reframed, shadows of the past casting new shapes over old scenes. The confession didn't erase their suffering. It amplified it, turning what had been a slow-burning ache into a blazing reminder of the fragility of life, the cruelty of secrets kept in silence. The confessor's background was scrutinized as the town collectively tried to understand the incomprehensible. Who was capable of living among the ordinary, blending in, smiling, while harboring a secret so devastating? Friends, co-workers, neighbors, people who had never suspected, were interrogated by memories that now seemed suspect. Social media accounts, emails, texts, diary entries were analyzed with forensic intensity. The perpetrator's life became a case study in deception, a careful layering of mundane routines over concealed malice. Every mundane act, a wave, a purchase, a friendly greeting, was reinterpreted as potential misdirection, camouflage hiding intent. Psychologists weighed in, analyzing behavioral patterns, constructing profiles that tried to rationalize the irrational. The truth, however, was only partially comforting. Evil is not always monstrous in appearance. It is often concealed behind ordinariness, behind smiles that disarm suspicion, behind the predictable rhythms of life. The town itself became a character in this unfolding drama. Streets that had been familiar were now haunted. Homes once secure felt permeable, vulnerable. Children spoke in whispers of the girl who had vanished, sharing fears of shadows, of strangers, of people who seemed too friendly. Even adults experienced a heightened awareness, a constant scanning of their surroundings, the instinctive need to catalog the comings and goings of neighbors. Local businesses noticed it too. Parents more watchful, teenagers reluctant to linger, conversations punctuated by fear and speculation. The town had absorbed the horror, integrated it into its collective consciousness, forever changed by a single night decades prior. The confessor's revelation didn't just answer questions. It rewrote the community's sense of security, trust, and familiarity. Investigators, driven by both professional obligation and personal determination, dug into every facet of the perpetrator's life. Employment records, travel logs, personal relationships, hobbies, all were dissected. Each detail, no matter how small, became a potential key to understanding the actions that had remained hidden for 13 years. Forensic accountants traced transactions that hinted at premeditation, timelines meticulously reconstructed to validate or challenge the confession. Analysts built charts, maps, timelines, a visual rendering of darkness, a schematic of a crime concealed in plain sight. Every answer generated new questions. Why the victim?
Why then?
Why here? The confession provided facts, but the emotional weight, The why remained partially obscured, a puzzle only partially solved. Media coverage intensified, mixing raw emotion with investigative reporting. Television crews returned to the town, their cameras capturing not only the ongoing investigation but also the subtle tremors of a community in shock. Street interviews revealed fear, anger, sorrow, and a lingering disbelief that one of their own could have committed such an act. National outlets picked up the story, emphasizing the cold case's years-long dormancy and the dramatic confession that shattered the town's collective calm. Headlines screamed, "Florida Cold Case Confession Stuns Families. Mystery Solved After 13 Years of Silence. Shocking Revelation Rewrites Local History." The language itself reflected the intensity, the urgency, the deep emotional resonance of the story. Yet even with the confession, questions lingered in the air like humidity. Investigators pressed for additional details: the location of evidence, any accomplices, the precise sequence of events. The perpetrator's calm recounting clashed with the chaos of memory, yet revealed enough to guide authorities to new physical evidence. Old search sites were revisited, containers re-examined, and finally, items once overlooked, a scrap of clothing, a personal item, a trace of DNA, were matched to the victim, creating tangible closure in a case that had been long intangible. Experts noted the rarity of such breakthroughs. Cold cases, particularly those dormant for over a decade, rarely saw resolution this clear. Yet Florida's 2005 case had not only been reopened but reconstructed, pieced together from fragments of recollection, confession, and forensic persistence. Psychological ramifications rippled outward. Therapists, counselors, and grief specialists were brought in to work with the family and community members. Post-traumatic stress, survivor guilt, the renewed pain of remembered terror, all required careful navigation. Children who had once played in the streets, teenagers who had grown up under the shadow of uncertainty, adults whose routines had been subtly reshaped by fear, all were affected. The confession had illuminated the darkness, yet it also cast long, lingering shadows over daily life. Conversations were cautious, laughter tempered, the invisible weight of history pressing on shoulders not directly involved but deeply impacted. As law enforcement continued their methodical work, the confessor's demeanor became part of the story. Calm, measured, almost clinical in recounting events, the individual revealed a mind disciplined in secrecy, patience, and concealment. The contrast between the banality of everyday life and the horror of actions committed created an unsettling paradox. Psychologists emphasized the implications. This was not impulsive violence, but deliberate planning, execution, and concealment, demonstrating a capacity for calculated deception that challenged assumptions about safety and human nature. The confession was both cathartic and horrifying, a window into darkness, a mirror reflecting the potential for evil to hide in plain sight. The community's grief evolved, layering relief with shock and curiosity with fear. Local historians documented the unfolding events, recognizing that the story would become part of the town's lore, a cautionary tale about vigilance, trust, and the fragility of safety. Scholars analyzed behavioral patterns, journalists chronicled human reactions, and ordinary citizens absorbed lessons in a visceral way that statistics and studies cannot convey. The case, once dormant, now exerted a profound influence on civic consciousness, parenting practices, and the collective psyche. Florida, 2005, and the subsequent confession became more than a story. It became a lasting imprint on memory, identity, and the shared understanding of vulnerability. Even as the legal process began, as indictments were filed and proceedings scheduled, the emotional undercurrent persisted. The town navigated a fragile balance between anticipation of justice and the resurgence of trauma. The girl's disappearance, once abstract in its horror, became immediate and personal through the confessor's vivid recollections. Community meetings, vigils, and memorials reinforced the emotional significance of the case, while simultaneously reminding everyone that resolution in court would not erase years of fear and uncertainty. Cold case, once a term describing absence and mystery, had transformed into a symbol of revelation, exposure, and the enduring impact of hidden violence. The courtroom was a theater of tension, every seat occupied, every eye fixed on the accused, whose calm presence contrasted with the raw emotion that hung heavy in the air. Florida 2005, once a quiet town haunted by unanswered questions, had transformed into a stage where years of fear, grief, and speculation collided with the blunt force of truth. Families of the victims sat together, hands clasped, fingers digging into palms as they braced for the recital of horrors that had long remained hidden. Journalists scribbled notes furiously, cameras zoomed in to capture microexpressions, the subtle tremor in a lip, the tightening of a jaw, the silent weight of anticipation that enveloped everyone. The case, now decades old, was no longer just a cold case. It was a living, breathing chronicle of terror, exposure, and communal reckoning. Opening statements were sharp, precise, and delivered with a controlled intensity that mirrored the gravity of the crime. Prosecutors laid bare the narrative, weaving together years of investigation, forensic breakthroughs, and the confession that had shattered the town's fragile sense of security. Every word seemed to echo in the high-ceilinged courtroom, bouncing off walls, imprinting on the collective memory of those present. The defense, constrained yet strategic, attempted to cast doubt, scrutinizing timelines, questioning interpretations of evidence, and probing for inconsistencies. The battle of narrative unfolded not just on legal grounds but on the emotional landscape, as witnesses, family members, and even the public struggled to reconcile the banality of ordinary life with the extraordinary darkness revealed by the confession. Eyewitnesses returned to the stand, their testimonies a fragile bridge between memory and truth. Neighbors recounted details long buried in the folds of time, a sound heard late at night, a fleeting shadow in the corner of vision, a car parked where it shouldn't have been. Each recollection, no matter how minor, was examined under the unforgiving scrutiny of cross-examination. The passage of years had blurred some details, sharpened others, but collectively, they created a mosaic that both corroborated and complicated the narrative. The emotional toll on witnesses was palpable. Some struggled with tears, some with silence, their voices trembling as they spoke truths that had remained unspoken for over a decade. The courtroom itself became a crucible of memory, trauma, and revelation, where every sentence spoken carried the weight of lost years. Forensic evidence played a pivotal role, the bridge between confession and verification. DNA samples, once inert, now spoke volumes. Hair strands, fibers, fingerprints, and trace elements traced a path through time, corroborating the suspect's admissions. Experts presented complex analyses in language that was technical yet urgent, translating microscopic details into incontrovertible proof. Photographs of recovered items, preserved evidence, and crime scene reconstructions were projected for the courtroom, each image a jolt to the collective consciousness of all present. The victim's belongings, once cataloged and stored in sterile evidence rooms, now became powerful symbols of memory, absence, and loss. The juxtaposition of scientific precision with human emotion amplified the tension, reminding everyone that beneath the procedural veneer lay a profoundly personal tragedy. The defense probed relentlessly, seeking cracks, inconsistencies, or misinterpretations, yet the weight of corroborating evidence and a detailed confession left little room for doubt. Each challenge was met with meticulous explanation, testimony layered upon testimony, reinforcing the painstaking work of investigators who had never abandoned the case. Years of cold storage, forgotten interviews, overlooked details, and technological advancements converged into a cohesive narrative that was as unrelenting as it was tragic. Every challenge, every objection, every legal maneuver became part of a larger rhythm, a tense cadence that carried the emotional charge of a community that had waited over a decade for truth. Outside the courtroom, the town absorbed the proceedings with a mixture of fascination and dread. Residents gathered in cafes, living rooms, and community centers, following news coverage, discussing details, and replaying memories in the context of new revelations. Social media buzzed with speculation, outrage, and reflection, while local newspapers chronicled daily developments, capturing not just facts, but the emotional undercurrents that pulsed through the community. Parents watched children closely. Neighbors glanced at neighbors, the invisible tension of uncertainty and revelation shaping everyday life. The cold case that had once been a haunting memory was now a tangible presence, casting shadows over routines, interactions, and the collective sense of safety. The prosecution introduced psychological analysis to contextualize the confession and the behavior of the perpetrator. Experts spoke of methodical planning, compartmentalization, and the deliberate concealment of intent over years. The courtroom listened as professionals dissected the cognitive patterns that allowed a person to blend into ordinary life while harboring extraordinary malice. The testimony was clinical, yet the implications were immediate and visceral. Families of the victim grappled with the chilling realization that normalcy had been a carefully constructed facade, that the person responsible had existed alongside them, unnoticed, unremarkable, and terrifyingly present. The town collectively shivered at the reminder that evil often wears the mask of ordinariness, that danger can reside in plain sight, and that time alone cannot guarantee the resolution of hidden threats. The emotional apex of the trial arrived when the confession was read aloud in full, each word a strike against the silence that had enveloped the community for 13 years. The accused spoke with a calm clarity that contrasted with the chaos of memory and grief surrounding them. Details of that night, previously confined to private recollections, were now illuminated in stark, unflinching language. The parents of the victim flinched at phrases that mapped the geography of terror, the calculated steps taken to conceal the act, and the intimate knowledge of their daughter's final movements. Each revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, the audience collectively holding their breath, hearts hammering in the rhythm of disbelief, horror, and sorrow. Media coverage intensified, documenting the raw, unfiltered impact of the confession and trial. Cameras captured close-ups of the accused, the parents, and witnesses, juxtaposing calm articulation with raw emotion. Reports emphasized the unique nature of the case, a cold case unresolved for over a decade, now brought to light through confession, corroborated evidence, and relentless investigative work. Headlines splashed across news feeds, some emphasizing closure, others highlighting shock, creating a narrative of national fascination with the intersection of hidden evil, community vulnerability, and the pursuit of justice. The story reverberated beyond the town, touching audiences far removed from the original tragedy, a universal tale of fear, secrecy, and revelation. Legal strategy shifted to anticipation of sentencing, with arguments focused on mitigating factors, intent, and the depth of premeditation. The courtroom became a theater not only of evidence, but of moral consideration, weighing the gravity of actions against the psychological profile of the perpetrator. Each testimony, each exhibit, and each legal argument layered complexity onto a narrative already saturated with emotion. Observers struggled to reconcile procedural justice with the raw, human toll of the crime, recognizing that while the law might deliver verdicts, it could not restore years lost, innocence shattered, or the persistent ache of unanswered questions finally given voice. Outside the courtroom, the community confronted the residual trauma of living alongside the perpetrator for so long. Public forums, therapy sessions, and community meetings became spaces to process grief, fear, and the unsettling realization that safety is contingent, trust fragile, and darkness often invisible. Streets that had once been routine now carried an undercurrent of caution. Neighbors exchanged glances with subtle wariness, and the echoes of that fateful May night lingered in the minds of all who had lived through the uncertainty. Parents became hypervigilant, teenagers more cautious, and the town collectively acknowledged a lesson in vigilance that was simultaneously immediate and profound. The confession had illuminated truth, but it also cast long shadows, revealing vulnerabilities that were deeply human and uncomfortably persistent. The family grappled with complex emotions, relief at answers, horror at details, grief at irretrievable loss, and a cautious hope for justice. Therapy sessions documented the intricate layers of trauma, the lingering nightmares, and the intrusive recollections that surfaced unexpectedly. Every anniversary, every milestone, every ordinary day carried echoes of that night, amplified by the revelation of truth. Friends, neighbors, and classmates shared in the quiet processing of communal grief, reinforcing the understanding that while the case was nearing legal resolution, the emotional journey was far from over. The confession did not erase absence, it merely reframed it, forcing the town to confront the intricate interplay of time, memory, and trauma. Investigators continued to analyze the confessor's life, mapping relationships, routines, and interactions that had gone unnoticed for years. The analysis revealed patterns of secrecy, manipulation, and careful concealment, emphasizing the extraordinary effort required to live undetected while committing acts of calculated malice. Behavioral profiles were refined, timelines scrutinized, and new insights into risk assessment and predictive patterns emerged. Scholars, law enforcement agencies, and criminologists observed the case as a rare convergence of confession, forensic validation, and long-term investigative persistence. The lessons drawn extended beyond the immediate tragedy, informing future approaches to cold cases, missing persons investigations, and psychological profiling. Even as sentencing loomed, the emotional landscape of the town remained fractured. Public spaces carried a subtle tension, community routines adjusted unconsciously, and conversations were tinged with the awareness of past vulnerability. The girl's disappearance, once abstract, was now concretely contextualized through confession and evidence, yet the emotional resonance persisted. Streets, parks, schools, every familiar location was reframed through the lens of absence and revelation. Parents maintained closer vigilance over children, neighbors monitored each other more carefully, and the shared memory of fear became an enduring layer of collective consciousness. The cold case, once dormant, had ignited an ongoing dialogue about safety, awareness, and the persistent shadows that lurk behind ordinary life. The day of sentencing arrived under a Florida sun that seemed unbearably bright, reflecting off pavement that had borne the weight of years-long uncertainty. The courthouse steps were crowded, a mixture of onlookers, journalists, and residents whose lives had been irreversibly altered by one night in May 2005. Cameras clicked incessantly, microphones jostled for position, and the hum of whispered conversations filled the air. Inside, the courtroom held an almost sacred tension, every eye fixed on the accused, whose demeanor remained unnervingly composed, betraying no hint of remorse yet radiating an unsettling certainty. The family of the victim, now aged and wearied by more than a decade of grief, sat together, hands clasped, eyes darkened by sleepless nights and years of imagining worst-case scenarios. The moment had arrived when words, evidence, and years of investigation would converge, a judicial reckoning long delayed, but finally unavoidable. The judge entered with solemn authority, the gavel striking with a force that resonated through the high-ceilinged chamber, signaling the transition from narrative to judgment. Prosecutors presented a final summation, weaving together confession, corroborated evidence, and the inexorable chain of events that had led to this day. Each sentence reverberated like a drumbeat in the collective chest of the courtroom, punctuating the stark reality that years of waiting, hope, and despair were culminating in a moment of undeniable closure. The defense offered mitigation, highlighting procedural nuances, psychological profiles, and the calculated reasoning behind actions, but the narrative of fact, meticulously documented, left little room for doubt. Every eye followed every movement, every breath, every nuance, as if the collective consciousness of the community were straining to absorb the enormity of the moment. The confessor remained stoic, delivering answers when prompted, providing explanations in calm, measured tones that contrasted sharply with the tremors of emotion surrounding them. Every detail they recounted drew gasps from family members, chills through investigators, and murmurs of disbelief from the gallery. The map of that fateful night, streets traveled, obstacles circumvented, the abandoned bicycle, the discarded backpack, was laid bare, reconstructed in meticulous detail, leaving no room for speculation about what had occurred. Each revelation rippled through the courtroom, a shockwave of recognition that decades-long uncertainty had finally been pierced by the unflinching truth. The room, heavy with history, grief, and unresolved tension, seemed to hold its collective breath as the judicial process unfolded. Outside the courthouse, the town pulsed with anxiety and fascination. Residents gathered in clusters, televisions and smartphones capturing every live feed, communities watching together as the narrative of horror and revelation unfolded in real time. Conversations hummed with a mixture of outrage, relief, and disbelief. Parents whispered warnings to children, neighbors exchanged guarded glances, and the memory of the 2005 disappearance was freshly invoked in every corner. Streets that had once seemed ordinary now carried a heightened awareness, a subtle vigilance that reflected the profound psychological impact of living alongside hidden malice for over a decade. Even ordinary routines, grocery trips, school drop-offs, walks in the park, were tinged with caution, a subconscious acknowledgement that the invisible threads of danger had been interwoven into everyday life. Within the courtroom, forensic experts were summoned once more to clarify lingering details. DNA evidence, fibers, and other minute traces were analyzed in painstakingly methodical language, translating scientific discovery into the narrative of a crime meticulously concealed for 13 years. The precision of modern forensics contrasted starkly with the chaos of memory, grief, and loss that saturated every corner of the room. Each small confirmation, a hair, a trace of DNA, a fiber, became a testament to the persistence of truth, a validation of investigative rigor, and a haunting reminder of the meticulous planning and concealment that had allowed the crime to remain hidden for so long. These small pieces of evidence, seemingly insignificant in isolation, collectively reconstructed the events of that night, transforming the cold case from abstract memory into tangible reality. The emotional weight of the moment was most palpable in the family's reactions. Tears streamed unrestrained, hands gripped each other with white-knuckled intensity, and quiet sobs punctuated the otherwise formal proceedings. Relief was intertwined with horror, validation interwoven with grief, and the complex tapestry of long-delayed closure enveloped the family in a cocoon of contradictory emotions. The mother, who had clung to photographs, letters, and memories for years, now faced the stark clarity of truth, the simultaneous presence of loss and revelation. The father, quiet and resolute through years of waiting, now allowed the tremor of emotion to surface, shoulders sagging under the combined weight of anticipation and despair. Siblings, friends, and extended family members navigated the fraught spectrum of feelings, their collective experience reflecting the unique psychological burden of witnessing justice finally intersect with years of uncertainty. The sentencing itself was precise, deliberate, and formal. The judge enumerated the charges, the corroborated evidence, and the legal reasoning behind the punishment, transforming decades of speculation and fear into a concrete resolution within the framework of law. Every word was weighted with significance. Every clause underscored the gravity of premeditation, the deliberate concealment of truth, and the profound impact on the victim's family and community. The gavel fell again, final and decisive, a punctuation mark on a narrative that had spanned years, generations, and emotional landscapes. Outside the courthouse, a collective sigh of acknowledgement echoed through the town, mingling relief with the persistent resonance of trauma as residents processed the reality that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. Psychologists, counselors, and grief specialists emphasized that the legal conclusion, while important, did not equate to emotional resolution. Community members grappled with residual trauma, the persistent psychological imprint of living under the shadow of hidden malice, and the nuanced challenge of rebuilding a sense of safety and trust. Children were particularly vulnerable, their understanding of normalcy disrupted by the revelation that someone among them had been capable of such violence. Schools implemented programs for awareness, emotional support, and crisis counseling, integrating lessons from the case into educational frameworks to provide tools for coping with trauma and fear. The town's collective consciousness had been irreversibly altered, and while legal resolution was achieved, the psychological repercussions extended far beyond the courtroom. Media narratives explored both the crime and the broader societal implications. National coverage highlighted the rarity of confessions in cold cases, the interplay of technology and investigative persistence, and the extraordinary patience required by law enforcement to navigate years of uncertainty. Local outlets focused on community impact, family reactions, and the interplay between memory, trauma, and eventual resolution. Analysts speculated on the broader lessons for public safety, the psychological dynamics of hidden perpetrators, and the strategies for identifying risk within seemingly ordinary lives. Headlines proliferated. Florida cold case resolved after 13 years. Confession stuns families. Town grapples with revelation. Hidden danger revealed. Ordinary life shattered. The repetition of these narratives reinforced both the significance and the enduring emotional resonance of the case. Law enforcement reflected on the process, noting the intricate balance of diligence, patience, and adaptability required to resolve a cold case after more than a decade. Strategies included re-examining old evidence, leveraging technological advances, and continuously revisiting witness accounts for subtle inconsistencies and corroborations. Investigators emphasized that persistence and methodical attention to detail were crucial, illustrating the evolving nature of crime solving and the intersection of human memory, forensic science, and investigative rigor. The successful resolution of this cold case provided both validation for professional practices and a cautionary tale about the persistent consequences of unresolved crime within a community. Meanwhile, the town struggled with residual unease. Streets, homes, and neighborhoods were infused with heightened vigilance. Neighbors, once casual in their interactions, now observed each other more closely, consciously or unconsciously scanning for behavior that might indicate danger. Parents maintained a closer watch over children, their instincts sharpened by knowledge of vulnerability and past oversight. Community gatherings were tinged with subtle tension, a collective awareness of the thin lines separating ordinary life from concealed malice. Even everyday routines, previously taken for granted, were reframed in the context of awareness and precaution, the psychological impact of the case extending into habits, social interactions, and the fabric of communal life. The girl's absence remained a silent presence, an invisible thread woven into the daily life of the town. Memorials, photographs, and personal items preserved in homes and schools reminded residents of both the tragedy and the eventual revelation of truth. Anniversaries of the disappearance were marked by reflection, community remembrance, and quiet acknowledgement of the fragility of safety. The confessor's revelation, though delivering legal resolution, reinforced the enduring influence of trauma, memory, and communal consciousness. The town understood that closure in court does not erase the lived experience of fear, uncertainty, and loss, but it provides a framework for reconciliation and acknowledgement. Investigators continued post-sentencing work, following up on secondary leads, ensuring that the confessor's narrative aligned with physical evidence, and confirming that no additional parties were involved. Each verification step reinforced the credibility of the confession, providing further assurance to the family and community that the truth had been uncovered, however belatedly. The convergence of confession, corroborated evidence, and painstaking investigative work became a case study in resolving long-dormant cold cases, demonstrating the interplay of human memory, forensic technology, and legal diligence. The lessons extended beyond this Florida town, offering insights to law enforcement agencies, criminologists, and communities grappling with unresolved trauma. Even as justice was formalized, emotional and social reconstruction remained ongoing. Counseling sessions continued, community dialogues facilitated reflection, and families navigated the complex terrain of grief reframed by revelation. The tension between relief and enduring trauma created a nuanced emotional landscape, highlighting the multifaceted consequences of long-term uncertainty and the psychological imprint of cold cases. Public awareness, Educational initiatives and continued investigative diligence all contributed to shaping a communal environment capable of processing both the horror of past events and the potential for vigilance in the future. The confessor was transferred to a secure facility, a sterile, echoing space that felt both punitive and surreal. Concrete walls reflected the fluorescent lights, each beam casting long, angular shadows that seemed to mimic the twisted pathways of the mind within. Guards moved with measured caution, wary of both the history of the individual and the palpable tension radiating from every step. Psychologists, forensic specialists, and law enforcement officials observed from behind glass partitions, cataloging behavior, body language, and subtle indicators of thought. Every word uttered, every glance cast, became data, a fragment of understanding in the ongoing effort to decode the meticulous planning, concealment, and compartmentalization that had allowed a heinous act to remain hidden for over a decade. The facility became a stage where the interplay of law, psychology, and human curiosity intersected, each professional seeking insight while balancing ethical responsibility and procedural necessity. Inside, the perpetrator maintained a disquieting calm, a mask of control that belied the intensity of scrutiny. Interviews were methodical, probing for motive, methodology, and the intricate reasoning that underpinned actions. Each session was recorded, analyzed, and cross-referenced with prior statements, forensic data, and behavioral profiles. The psychologist's voice was calm, even inviting, attempting to coax honesty without confrontation, while investigators probed for contradictions, subtleties, and glimpses of remorse. The confessor's responses were precise, often chilling in their clarity, revealing a mind structured around secrecy, anticipation, and the careful orchestration of narrative. The subtle pleasure derived from control over disclosure was evident, a stark reminder that concealment had been as deliberate as the original act itself. Meanwhile, the community outside the facility grappled with a lingering unease. Florida 2005, once a quiet town defined by ordinary routines, had absorbed trauma into its very streets. Residents passed familiar locations with heightened awareness, intersections where children had ridden bikes, parks where laughter had once echoed, and the canal where searches had once scoured for evidence. Each place, once neutral, now carried a residue of memory, speculation, and fear. Parents whispered cautionary tales, neighbors exchanged anxious glances, and teenagers recounted details in hushed tones, aware that the history of one night had fundamentally altered perceptions of safety and trust. The community's psychological landscape was indelibly marked, the interplay of revelation and trauma creating a new, pervasive layer of consciousness that would persist for years, influencing interactions, vigilance, and collective memory. Investigators continued to reconstruct the timeline of that May night, using the confession as both guide and verification tool. Street by street, landmark by landmark, they traced movements, actions, and deliberate misdirections that had concealed the crime for 13 years. Subtle details, previously overlooked, now gained significance. A misaligned street sign, a trace of tire tread, the faint impression of a footprint in mud hardened by time. Each discovery added texture to the narrative, transforming a cold case into a vivid reconstruction of terror, concealment, and human calculation. The forensic team worked meticulously, comparing contemporary evidence with archival records, photographs, and witness testimonies, striving to ensure that the reconstruction reflected both truth and plausibility. The town's familiar geography became a tableau of horror, each bend in a street or shadowed alley a reminder of vulnerability and hidden malevolence. As the trial's aftermath settled, journalists and documentary crews delved into the confessor's background, seeking to understand the person behind the act. Childhood patterns, familial relationships, social behaviors, and early signs of psychological divergence were examined in minute detail. Reports highlighted the duality of ordinary life masking extraordinary intent, reinforcing the chilling reality that evil often wears the disguise of normalcy. Schools, workplaces, and social spaces were re-examined in collective reflection as residents sought to reconcile past interactions with the knowledge of hidden actions. The confessor's history became a lens through which the community explored both individual pathology and systemic oversight, seeking lessons that extended beyond personal tragedy to broader societal vigilance. The psychological impact on the family persisted, intertwining grief with relief, sorrow with validation. Counseling sessions revealed complex patterns of trauma, intrusive memories triggered by mundane events, hypervigilance in daily routines, and the emotional oscillation between closure and ongoing pain. Every anniversary, every moment of quiet reflection was infused with both loss and the reaffirmation that truth had emerged. Siblings wrestled with feelings of survivor's guilt, parents confronted lingering questions about missed signs, and extended family navigated the intricate dynamics of collective grief reframed by revelation. Emotional recovery, professionals emphasized, was not linear. The confessor's precise recounting of events both facilitated closure and perpetuated psychological tension, requiring careful, sustained support. Community dynamics evolved in parallel. Neighborhoods, once loosely connected, now developed a heightened sense of vigilance, informal networks of awareness forming as families shared observations, recollections, and strategies for ensuring safety. Public spaces were subtly reinterpreted. Parks and streets were viewed through a lens of caution, familiarity tempered by awareness of past concealment. Local schools implemented educational programs addressing personal safety, critical thinking, and resilience in the face of trauma, integrating lessons drawn from both the case and the psychological studies of long-term concealment. The town collectively grappled with the paradox of resolution, justice achieved, yet the residual psychological imprint of terror enduring, shaping social interaction, communal behavior, and the perception of ordinary life. Meanwhile, investigators pursued secondary leads arising from the confession. Questions of motive, opportunity, and potential peripheral involvement were examined with precision. Surveillance footage, financial records, and social connections were reanalyzed, ensuring that the scope of investigation was comprehensive. Every statement, no matter how minor, was cross-referenced with forensic data, witness recollections, and previous investigative records. The meticulous process underscored the intersection of human memory, technology, and procedural diligence, highlighting both the persistence required to resolve cold cases and the challenges inherent in reconstructing long-concealed actions. Investigative teams documented their methods for internal review, creating a framework that would inform future cases and cold case units nationwide. Public reaction remained intense. Media outlets continued coverage, not only reporting developments, but analyzing behavioral patterns, forensic breakthroughs, and psychological dynamics. Headlines emphasized the extraordinary persistence of investigators, the chilling precision of the confessor, and the long-delayed resolution that had gripped the community. Social media became a platform for collective reflection, debate, and support, as residents, family members, and observers from across the nation shared interpretations, emotional reactions, and personal narratives inspired by the case. The story transcended local boundaries, becoming both a cautionary tale and a reflection on the fragility of trust, the power of memory, and the capacity for malevolence to exist unnoticed within ordinary settings. The confessor's interviews continued to reveal unsettling details, methods of concealment, deliberate manipulation of public perception, and calculated evasion of detection. Psychologists and criminologists analyzed these disclosures, refining profiles, behavioral models, and risk assessment strategies. The insights gained were profound, demonstrating how deliberate planning, patience, and social camouflage can enable a crime to remain hidden for years. Each revelation was unsettling yet instructive, a combination of horror and empirical learning that illuminated the intersection of human psychology, criminal behavior, and investigative persistence. Lessons from the case extended beyond the individual tragedy, informing broader practices in law enforcement, forensic science, and community awareness. At the family level, coping strategies evolved. Parents engaged in structured therapy, individual and group sessions addressing unresolved grief, trauma, and hypervigilance. Siblings participated in support networks for those impacted by violent crime, exploring both personal narratives and collective experiences. Memories of the victim, once suffused with absence and uncertainty, were reframed through evidence and confession, facilitating partial emotional integration while acknowledging the enduring void. Each family member navigated a delicate balance between acknowledgement of truth, processing of trauma, and the pursuit of day-to-day functionality, a psychological journey shaped by both the immediacy of revelation and the long-term consequences of loss. Community rituals emerged as both coping and commemorative mechanisms. Annual memorials, vigils, and public discussions reinforced the significance of the case, honoring the victim while acknowledging communal trauma. Schools incorporated lessons on personal safety, vigilance, and ethical responsibility, emphasizing awareness without paranoia. Civic leaders facilitated dialogues on trust, oversight, and collective responsibility, integrating insights from both investigative findings and psychological analysis. The town's collective consciousness had been reshaped, an enduring awareness of vulnerability embedded alongside the lessons of justice, resilience, and the necessity of vigilance in everyday life. The confessor's ongoing interactions with the legal system, psychological evaluation, and forensic review created a continuous narrative thread that reinforced both accountability and understanding. Legal teams monitored procedural compliance, psychologists documented behavioral responses, and investigators ensured alignment between confession and tangible evidence. Each layer of oversight emphasized precision, responsibility, and the enduring importance of integrating multifaceted perspectives in understanding both the crime and its broader implications. The process exemplified the interplay between law, psychology, and communal awareness, demonstrating the depth and complexity of resolving a cold case with far-reaching consequences. Even as the immediate legal proceedings concluded, the ripples persisted. Families continued to navigate grief reframed by clarity, communities remained vigilant, and investigators documented lessons for future application. The town, once defined by ordinary rhythms and unexamined trust, now carried a layered consciousness, integrating memory, trauma, and revelation into daily life. Streets, homes, schools, and social spaces bore the subtle imprint of knowledge, awareness, and reflection. The story of Florida 2005, once a cold case suspended in time, had become a continuous thread in the communal fabric, shaping perception, behavior, and understanding of both human nature and the fragility of everyday safety. Months passed after the sentencing, yet the air in the town remained thick with the residue of disbelief. Florida 2005 had been irrevocably transformed, its ordinary streets now haunted by memory, speculation, and the quiet hum of collective vigilance. Every crosswalk, every schoolyard, every park bench carried an invisible weight, a reminder that the past had been neither random nor distant. Residents moved through familiar spaces with a sharpened awareness, their senses attuned to subtle cues that had previously gone unnoticed. Shadows lingered longer in the corners of vision, doors were double-checked, bicycles were tracked with a careful eye. The psychological imprint of that night, amplified by confession and judicial finality, had etched itself into the town's routines, behaviors, and interactions, creating an atmosphere where ordinary life was inseparable from the memory of horror. Families of the victim continued to navigate a labyrinth of emotions, the oscillation between relief and grief more pronounced than ever. The parents, having endured 13 years of unanswered questions, now faced the reality that closure was simultaneously comforting and devastating. They could now name the person responsible, understand the sequence of events, and confirm that the years of fear had not been imagined, but with clarity came the resurgence of trauma. Each conversation, each casual remark about safety, each unexpected sound became an emotional trigger. Nightmares persisted, flashbacks intruded without warning, and the knowledge that life could pivot in an instant haunted both conscious thought and subconscious reflection. Therapy sessions, structured and persistent, became lifelines, providing a framework to process both confirmation and loss, a roadmap through grief reframed by revelation. The confessor's presence in the penal system remained a focal point for psychologists and investigators. Studies of behavior, adaptation, and ongoing interactions became part of a continuous dialogue on criminal psychology and concealment strategies. Researchers analyzed interviews, scrutinized nonverbal cues, and tracked responses to stimuli, seeking to understand the cognitive and emotional patterns that enabled a life of ordinary interaction to coexist with acts of extreme violence. Observers noted a meticulous compartmentalization, an ability to emotionally disengage from both the crime and the community, maintaining a calculated calm that belied the magnitude of the actions committed. Each session yielded insights into patience, manipulation, and the deliberate maintenance of concealment, a chilling testament to the capacity of human calculation. Meanwhile, the town itself remained suspended in the tension between memory and ongoing vigilance. Civic leaders, educators, and community organizers developed programs to address long-term psychological impacts. Schools integrated awareness initiatives, teaching students how to recognize subtle cues, manage fear, and foster resilience. Local forums encouraged dialogue among families, neighbors, and law enforcement, creating spaces for reflection, communal healing, and education. Residents shared experiences, recounted recollections, and collectively reinforced the social fabric against the lingering influence of fear. The collective memory of Florida 2005 had become a tool for both caution and connection, a shared narrative that reshaped interactions, instilled awareness, and emphasized the fragility of trust in seemingly ordinary circumstances. Media outlets continued to explore the broader implications of the case. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports delved into the mechanisms that allowed concealment for over a decade, the interplay of social trust, procedural gaps, and psychological manipulation. Analysts emphasized the rare combination of confession, corroborated evidence, and investigative persistence that had led to resolution. Public discourse extended beyond the particulars of one crime, reflecting on societal patterns, communal responsibility, and the structural frameworks that allow long-term concealment to persist. Headlines reinforce lessons drawn from both procedural diligence and human oversight, highlighting the importance of vigilance, awareness, and the persistent pursuit of truth. The psychological repercussions extended beyond the immediate family. Neighbors, friends, and casual acquaintances who had interacted with the confessor experienced a subtle, persistent unease. Memories were reframed, shared smiles, casual conversations, and seemingly innocuous gestures were now scrutinized, layered with the knowledge that deception had been present among them. The town grappled with a collective paranoia tempered by reason, an awareness that ordinary appearances can conceal extraordinary intent. Conversations carried unspoken tension, routine activities were punctuated by caution, and social trust was recalibrated in ways both conscious and unconscious. Florida 2005 had learned that normalcy is fragile, that perception can be deceptive, and that vigilance is a continuous, necessary state. Law enforcement agencies conducted ongoing reviews of the investigative process, emphasizing procedural refinement, forensic methodology, and long-term case management. Each step of the confessor's apprehension and prosecution was analyzed for lessons in methodology, strategy, and human factors. Investigators documented successes, missteps, and overlooked details, creating protocols designed to enhance the effectiveness of cold case resolution in other jurisdictions. Conferences, peer-reviewed studies, and training programs drew upon the Florida case as a template, demonstrating both the persistence required and the complex interplay of human cognition, forensic science, and community involvement. The town's tragedy became, paradoxically, a model for prevention, detection, and procedural innovation. Within families, emotional complexity persisted. Children who had grown up in the shadow of uncertainty now processed revelations about both hidden danger and the eventual discovery of truth. Adolescents navigated the dual awareness of personal vulnerability and societal justice, learning lessons in caution, awareness, and resilience. Parents monitored these developmental shifts, seeking to balance protection with empowerment, creating dialogue that acknowledged fear without fostering paralyzing anxiety. The community's younger generation absorbed narratives of both horror and resolution, internalizing lessons about safety, morality, and the unpredictable nature of human behavior. Psychological study of the confessor's behavior continued to inform understanding of concealment and compartmentalization. Experts highlighted the meticulous structuring of daily life, the layering of normalcy over malevolent intent, and the strategic manipulation of social perception. The confession, corroborated through forensic verification, provided a rare glimpse into long-term deception and the deliberate maintenance of invisibility within a community. Case studies emphasize the importance of integrating behavioral analysis, forensic science, and sustained investigation in the resolution of cold cases. The insights gained had implications for law enforcement, criminal psychology, and social awareness, offering both practical guidance and cautionary reflection on the potential for undetected malice in ordinary life. The town's collective healing was uneven, layered with resilience, wariness, and enduring trauma. Memorials, public discussions, and communal initiatives provided structure for processing grief, acknowledging loss, and reinforcing shared social norms. Streets, parks, and schools became spaces of both remembrance and vigilance, subtle markers of history interwoven with ongoing life. Residents navigated a dual awareness, the reassurance of justice achieved and the persistent understanding that the past, though legally resolved, left indelible marks on perception, behavior, and communal memory. Florida 2005 had integrated the case into its identity, shaping both public consciousness and private reflection. Continued analysis of evidence yielded incremental insights. Investigators revisited archives, scrutinized forensic materials, and examined timelines with the precision of surgeons, each discovery adding nuance to the overall narrative. Small discrepancies, once ignored, were now examined for significance. Minor scratches, fiber patterns, or overlooked witness statements. Each verification step reinforced the integrity of the confession while illuminating the meticulous planning and execution that had allowed concealment for over a decade. Lessons drawn from these analyses informed protocols in cold case management, highlighting the importance of technological adaptation, continuous review, and the recognition of subtle behavioral indicators. Media coverage, both local and national, emphasized the duality of closure and lingering psychological impact. Stories highlighted procedural achievement, emotional resolution, and the profound social ramifications of long-term concealment. Public discourse explored both individual responsibility and communal dynamics, reflecting on the structural, psychological, and social factors that allowed a cold case to persist. Headlines underscored both shock and resolution. Florida cold case reopens collective memory. Confession illuminates hidden malice, reshaping town consciousness. Community navigates justice, grief, and awareness. The repetition and amplification of these narratives reinforced both collective understanding and vigilance, shaping ongoing public perception. The confessor's incarceration introduced new layers of observation, evaluation, and containment. Behavioral monitoring, structured interviews, and psychological profiling continued to yield insight into the cognitive and emotional structures underlying concealment, premeditation, and manipulation. Forensic psychologists highlighted the strategic compartmentalization evident in daily routines, social interactions, and responses to interrogation. Each insight added to the broader understanding of criminal behavior, informing both ongoing study and practical application in law enforcement, risk assessment, and procedural refinement. The confessor became, in effect, both subject and teacher, providing a chilling yet invaluable perspective on long-term concealment and human calculation. Meanwhile, the town continued to balance grief with daily life, vigilance with routine, and remembrance with forward movement. Streets retained the subtle tension of memory, schools implemented reflective programming, and neighborhoods fostered communal awareness. Families integrated lessons of vigilance and awareness into daily routines, cultivating resilience without succumbing to paranoia. The psychological landscape was layered, complex, and enduring, reflecting both the trauma of past events and the adaptive capacity of human cognition to incorporate revelation, grief, and practical foresight. Florida 2005 had evolved, shaped by history, justice, and the profound interplay of human vulnerability and societal response. Even as the confessor settled into the routine of incarceration, the town's heartbeat remained irregular, a subtle tremor running through every street and neighborhood. Florida 2005 had learned to live with both the relief of closure and the persistent echo of unanswered questions. Though the legal system had pronounced judgment, the psychological and social dimensions of the case lingered, leaving communities and families navigating terrain that was both familiar and disorienting. Memories surfaced unbidden, triggered by mundane events: the laughter of children on bicycles, the sound of a car door slamming, the subtle shift in wind across a canal's surface, each sensation a reminder that the past had never truly departed. Residents found themselves caught between the reassurance of justice and the haunting understanding that life could pivot from ordinary to catastrophic in a single, fleeting moment. Therapists and psychologists emphasized the residual trauma, describing it as an echo of suspense and fear that persisted long after the immediate threat had been neutralized. Families reported subtle yet persistent anxiety, a hyper-awareness of potential danger in ordinary situations, and a reluctance to fully trust the familiar. School counselors noted that children internalized the narrative, often framing everyday interactions through the lens of vigilance and uncertainty. Parents, in turn, reinforced precautionary behaviors not out of paranoia, but from a carefully cultivated understanding of risk and unpredictability. Community programs were designed to balance awareness with resilience, offering strategies to process fear without succumbing to constant hypervigilance. The town's collective psychology had been rewritten, its rhythm adjusted to accommodate both memory and caution, and the subtle tension became woven into the fabric of daily life. Investigators returned intermittently to the scene, retracing paths, reevaluating evidence, and refining the narrative of that night in May 2005. With each visit, small details emerged with greater clarity: faint impressions in the mud, an overlooked mark on a fence, the residual placement of personal items once dismissed as inconsequential. Modern forensic technology permitted analysis of elements previously deemed irrelevant, translating years-old physical traces into actionable insights. The confessor's testimony, corroborated with these findings, created a layered understanding of method, timing, and behavioral patterns, a chilling testament to the precision and deliberation underlying concealment. Even minor discrepancies became significant, illustrating the complexity of human memory, perception, and the interplay between evidence and confession. Community response continued to evolve, reflecting the complex interweaving of trauma, relief, and vigilance. Neighborhood watches became more structured, informal monitoring networks strengthened, and social interactions were subtly reframed. Residents developed a dual consciousness, balancing daily normalcy with the awareness that concealment of malevolent intent could occur under ordinary appearances. Conversations incorporated lessons in situational awareness. Children were educated in subtle cues for safety, and adults engaged in discussions about historical oversights and preventative strategies. Florida 2005, once an unremarkable town, had internalized a culture of vigilance shaped by both personal experience and the extraordinary nature of a crime revealed only through confession and investigative persistence. Media attention, though reduced from the intensity of trial coverage, persisted in exploring long-term implications. Documentaries revisited the case, focusing on psychological profiles, investigative techniques, and the structural lessons derived from 13 years of dormancy. Analyses emphasize the intersection of law enforcement diligence, forensic innovation, and social oversight, highlighting how procedural gaps and ordinary trust can allow malevolent behavior to remain concealed. Local and national journalists continued interviews with family members, psychologists, and law enforcement, capturing reflections on coping, awareness, and the nuances of integrating closure into ongoing life. Social media facilitated public discourse, with discussions oscillating between fascination, moral reflection, and empathy for the enduring consequences experienced by victims' families and communities. Psychologists increasingly focused on understanding the confessor's cognitive architecture. Structured interviews, observation of daily routines within incarceration, and behavioral analysis provided insight into deliberate compartmentalization, manipulation, and long-term concealment strategies. Experts noted the meticulous layering of normalcy, the strategic deployment of social trust, and the deliberate avoidance of attention that allowed the crime to remain undetected. Each session offered both educational insight and chilling revelation, underscoring the complex capabilities of human cognition when deployed toward concealment and deception. These insights informed risk assessment, investigative methodology, and strategies for early detection of anomalous behavior within social networks, offering practical application in law enforcement and public safety. Families continued to navigate the layered complexity of grief reframed by revelation. Emotional processing remained nonlinear. Moments of relief intertwined with renewed sorrow, flashes of trauma mingled with validation, and recollections were periodically triggered by ordinary life events. Parents and siblings relied on therapy, communal support, and structured coping strategies, acknowledging the enduring presence of both absence and awareness. Memories of the victim were reframed through the prism of known facts, evidence, and confession, providing partial integration while maintaining acknowledgement of irretrievable loss. The town collectively learned that resolution in court does not equate to emotional closure. It is a framework, a scaffold on which ongoing processing occurs, with subtle psychological reverberations continuing indefinitely. The confessor's behavior within incarceration remained a focal point for study and observation. Routine activities, interpersonal interactions, and responses to procedural events were scrutinized for insight into long-term concealment strategies. Analysts observed a meticulous structuring of behavior, evidence of psychological compartmentalization, and calculated responses designed to maintain control over narrative perception. Each observation contributed to a nuanced understanding of cognitive strategies employed over years of concealment, providing both forensic and behavioral insights. Experts emphasized the broader applicability of these findings in identifying, predicting, and mitigating risks associated with long-term undetected malevolence in community and institutional settings. Meanwhile, investigators revisited related lines of inquiry to ensure comprehensive closure. Secondary leads, previously dormant or deemed minor, were reevaluated in light of the confession and subsequent evidence. Surveillance footage, correspondence, and archival documentation were scrutinized, ensuring alignment between statements, physical evidence, and behavioral patterns. Minor discrepancies were analyzed with forensic precision, revealing subtle indicators of premeditation, misdirection, and behavioral control. Each verification step reinforced confidence in both the confession's accuracy and the integrity of the investigative process, while illuminating the profound intricacy required to resolve long-standing cold cases. Local schools and community organizations implemented programs emphasizing awareness, resilience, and emotional processing. Children were taught to recognize subtle environmental cues, practice situational awareness, and cultivate adaptive coping mechanisms. Families participated in workshops addressing both emotional recovery and practical safety, integrating lessons from the case into daily routines. Community forums facilitated dialogue on the interplay of trauma, justice, and vigilance, fostering collective understanding while encouraging resilience. Florida 2005 had shifted culturally, integrating hard-earned lessons into the social fabric, blending awareness with community cohesion, and teaching that the presence of evil does not preclude the possibility of recovery, adaptation, or growth. Media outlets revisited the town intermittently, highlighting both the procedural accomplishment and the ongoing emotional impact. Coverage emphasized the rarity of confessions in cold cases, the procedural diligence required over 13 years, and the psychological insight derived from the confessor's behavior. Families shared reflections on the long journey from uncertainty to revelation, underscoring the enduring emotional imprint of both absence and disclosure. Headlines emphasized dual themes: resolution of crime and persistence of trauma, demonstrating the complex interplay between legal closure and social, emotional, and psychological realities. Social media amplified these narratives, facilitating national discussion, reflection, and shared understanding of both human vulnerability and investigative perseverance. The confessor's continued study offered insights not only into the crime itself, but into broader patterns of behavior, deception, and concealment. Analysts emphasize strategic evasion, compartmentalization, and the meticulous orchestration of social interactions to avoid detection. Observations highlighted the deliberate manipulation of perceived normalcy, the anticipation of investigative methods, and the controlled presentation of self to peers, authorities, and community members. Each session added granularity to the understanding of prolonged concealment, informing both law enforcement methodology and broader theoretical understanding of human behavior in the context of hidden malevolence. Communal awareness continued to evolve, reflecting the integration of lessons from both procedural and psychological domains. Residents maintained heightened attention to environmental cues, cultivated interpersonal vigilance, and emphasized communication and observation within social networks. Neighborhood dynamics shifted subtly, balancing trust with caution, ordinary engagement with reflective awareness. Community events, educational programming, and public discussions reinforced this dual consciousness, highlighting both the capacity for ordinary life to resume and the enduring presence of memory, trauma, and awareness. Florida 2005 had internalized the story, shaping collective behavior and perception for years to come, embedding the lessons of trauma and resolution within its cultural framework. Families, investigators, and the broader community collectively acknowledged that closure is rarely absolute. Emotional integration, social adaptation, and psychological reconciliation are processes that extend indefinitely, influenced by memory, reflection, and continued awareness. The confessor's incarceration, the legal resolution, and the forensic verification provided a foundation, but the human experience of loss, fear, and revelation persisted. The town, shaped by both tragedy and resolution, maintained a vigilant, reflective stance, honoring the victim's memory while striving for resilience, balance, and continuity in daily life. Florida 2005 had become both a testament to investigative diligence and a cautionary tale about hidden malice, a community forever intertwined with the echoes of a night that reshaped understanding, trust, and ordinary life. Time within the walls of the correctional facility moved differently, slower, yet suffused with a tense rhythm that seemed to mirror the confessor's own internal pacing. Florida 2005's darkest night had long passed, but inside these institutional corridors, the echoes of that May evening were inescapable. The confessor maintained a rigid schedule, exercises, mealtimes, and solitary reflection interwoven with controlled observation by guards and psychologists alike. Every step, every gesture, every pause was cataloged, analyzed, and cross-referenced with prior behavior, creating a continuous stream of data on patterns of concealment, manipulation, and controlled disclosure. The mind behind the crime, once hidden among ordinary life, now existed within a new framework, observed with meticulous precision, a living case study of long-term malice and strategic compartmentalization. Within the town, life moved forward, yet the shadow of that night remained, a quiet undercurrent shaping generations. Children who had been toddlers or born after 2005 navigated spaces infused with memory and instruction. Stories of disappearance, investigation, and eventual confession were recounted carefully, part cautionary tale, part moral lesson. Parents instilled both awareness and resilience, teaching vigilance without paranoia, caution without obsession. Community leaders emphasized remembrance alongside adaptation, ensuring that the memory of the victim, the lessons of oversight, and the triumph of investigative persistence remained central to cultural identity. Public spaces were suffused with subtle memorialization, plaques, benches, and school programs, all designed to remind without overwhelming, to educate without instilling fear. Investigators continued to revisit the case intermittently, cross-checking confessor statements against evidence, refining timelines, and exploring tangential leads that might expand understanding of motive, preparation, and psychological profile. Each re-examination revealed incremental insight, an overlooked witness, a minor discrepancy in timing, a subtle clue in digital records long considered irrelevant. Though the core case was closed, the pursuit of understanding extended beyond legal necessity, a testament to the human drive to comprehend the full scope of concealed malice. Forensic analysts continued to extract lessons in pattern recognition, behavioral prediction, and the meticulous interplay between confession, memory, and tangible evidence. The cold case, once dormant, remained a living framework for learning, both procedural and psychological. The confessor's daily existence became a performance of control, every interaction measured, every reaction calibrated. Psychologists noted the subtle enjoyment derived from continued attention, a calculated assertion of influence even behind bars. The confessor's statements were precise, unflinching, and methodical, a demonstration of intellect applied to concealment and manipulation. Each interview session served dual purposes, reinforcing institutional safety while providing ongoing insights into human behavior when malevolence is hidden for extended periods. Observers were struck by the consistency of compartmentalization, the deliberate avoidance of emotional leakage, and the strategic deployment of self-awareness to maintain authority over narrative perception. It was a disturbing yet invaluable opportunity to study a mind shaped by secrecy and premeditation. Outside, the town's collective memory remained active, interwoven with ongoing vigilance. Streets, once ordinary, were now perceived as layered landscapes of potential risk and historical reflection. Parents guided children with an acute awareness of environmental cues, teaching lessons derived not from paranoia, but from experience. Neighborhood networks, strengthened by shared history, became mechanisms for community oversight, blending social cohesion with practical observation. Florida 2005's cultural identity had shifted subtly but permanently. The ordinary was now viewed through the lens of awareness, and trust was tempered with the knowledge that malice can hide in plain sight. The town had internalized both caution and resilience, a dual consciousness passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor. Media coverage persisted, chronicling ongoing developments within the correctional system and the town's evolving social dynamics. Documentaries revisited timelines, behavioral analysis, and forensic breakthroughs, illustrating the interplay between human persistence, technological innovation, and social vigilance. Interviews with psychologists, law enforcement officials, and educators explored the broader implications of the case, highlighting lessons for both communities and institutions. Headlines reflected dual narratives: the confessor's continued observation and analysis behind bars, and the town's adaptation to a legacy of trauma, vigilance, and cautious resilience. Public discourse emphasized reflection, preparation, and the enduring intersection of memory and lived experience. Psychologists noted the confessor's adaptation to institutional routine, highlighting behaviors consistent with long-term strategic control. Meals, exercise, recreation, and interactions with staff were all orchestrated with precision, maintaining a veneer of compliance while asserting subtle dominance over perception. Observers remarked on the absence of overt aggression, replaced instead by methodical calculation, patient observation, and strategic disclosure. The confessor appeared to take a calculated satisfaction in the attention of authorities and researchers, manipulating narrative, timing, and emotional resonance to maintain influence even within a controlled environment. Each interaction reinforced understanding of compartmentalization, delayed gratification, and the psychological architecture of hidden intent maintained over years. Generational impact on the town became increasingly apparent. Children grew up in an environment where ordinary experiences were tempered by awareness of historical events. School curricula incorporated lessons on observation, ethics, and situational awareness, framing knowledge in practical and reflective ways. Families implemented both structured and informal coping strategies, balancing protection with the nurturing of independence and normalcy. Public gatherings included moments of reflection, memorialization, and education, embedding the lessons of the past within the communal narrative. Florida 2005's cultural consciousness was thus layered, integrating memory, vigilance, and resilience into the very fabric of social identity. Investigators occasionally returned to cold leads, minor anomalies, or unverified statements that had been deprioritized during the original investigation. Each revisit was meticulous. Evidence re-examined, witness recollections re-evaluated, forensic samples tested with the latest technology. Incremental discoveries reinforced the validity of the confessor's statements while providing nuanced insight into preparation, evasion, and concealment strategies. Even minor findings, a fiber analysis, a timestamp, or a geographic correlation, contributed to a broader understanding of behavioral patterns, investigative methodology, and the intricate interplay between evidence, memory, and confession. The cold case, though legally resolved, remained an active template for procedural refinement and criminal psychology study. The confessor's influence extended subtly beyond the correctional facility. Interviews, documented interactions, and behavioral assessments were incorporated into law enforcement training, academic research, and procedural manuals. Analysts highlighted methods of concealment, strategic manipulation, and the careful orchestration of ordinary behavior to mask malevolence. The confessor's ongoing observation and communication, though limited, provided a rare resource for understanding prolonged deception and behavioral compartmentalization. Insights were applied to both prevention strategies and investigative training, emphasizing vigilance, verification, and analytical rigor. Families continued the delicate task of emotional reconstruction. Parents, siblings, and extended family members navigated grief reframed by factual closure, balancing relief with ongoing trauma. Coping strategies evolved, including therapy, memorialization, and community engagement, blending psychological processing with practical resilience. Children internalized lessons of caution and observation. Parents modeled adaptive awareness, and the town collectively reinforced behavioral norms that integrated experience with safety. The social and emotional fabric of Florida 2005 had been reshaped by both the original crime and its revelation, creating a complex landscape of memory, vigilance, and communal responsibility. Community programs emphasized both remembrance and adaptation. Public spaces incorporated reflective elements, memorials, plaques, and educational signage provided subtle reminders of the past while promoting awareness and discussion. Neighborhood networks facilitated knowledge sharing, social cohesion, and early detection of irregular behavior. Schools integrated lessons on situational awareness, ethical responsibility, and emotional resilience, ensuring that younger generations internalized both caution and empathy. Florida 2005, transformed by tragedy, had constructed a living framework for vigilance and communal consciousness, balancing memory with practical adaptation. Media narratives continued to explore both individual and communal consequences. Documentaries and investigative series highlighted the confessor's behavioral complexity, the investigative persistence required for resolution, and the long-term social impact of concealed crime. Public discourse emphasized lessons in vigilance, trust, and the interplay between human behavior and societal structures. Interviews with psychologists, law enforcement officials, and community leaders offered layered perspectives, illustrating how a single cold case reverberated across decades, shaping not only legal precedent, but social consciousness, emotional processing, and intergenerational awareness. The confessor's continuing observation provided insights into long-term concealment, behavioral adaptation, and strategic engagement. Analysts noted the orchestration of routine, the calibration of interactions, and the patient anticipation of external scrutiny. Each session yielded both disturbing and